Good afternoon, everyone. I want to first and foremost thank the president, the people who helped to make this program successful. You surprised me with the amount of attendance. Do you hear me on the back?
Perfect. Yes.
Good, good. If you don't know me by now, so I want to re-announce my great pleasure to watch you eating while I'm speaking, because I ensure by that a total quietness while I'm speaking. And I want you to know that all the questions and concern and stuff like that, you're very welcome at the very end to just ask me. If you're not sure, write it down, and then we talk when we're done with this lecture. Before we go to our subject, I want you to know that we have a program in place for the upcoming, the end of summer, and you're going to get it by both, by mail, by email, by Twitter, Facebook, or whatever it is. And again, I want to thank all of you for being here and others who are going to watch us. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of this subject. As a matter of fact, that not long ago, when we're just preparing a lecture series, I asked people, do you know who Shabtai Tzvi is? And unfortunately, I asked people to raise their hand, and I was kind of shocked. So with that in mind, I would like to start with the question, which is, we are now in 2017, and we have, in a small religion of Judaism, relatively speaking to the world religions, we are one of the smallest in numbers of people, yet we divided to many movements. And the question is, why is that? I hope by the end of this talk, we get a better understanding why in the world we have a Hasidic Judaism, Reconstructionist, Reform, Conservative, Traditional, Lithuanian, and others. There is a story behind all of those organizations, even the earlier time, the Enlightenment and other movements. Many scholars hold, I'm not the only one in that sense, that Sabtai Tzvi and its tobacco is the real source, the real true beyond all those variety of movement. One of our great members have a special request. That fellow asked me while I was standing to eat something before this session, just to pray for the success of the Mets, right? And you know, in the life of a rabbi for more than 20 years, it's legitimate to ask the rabbi for anything and everything. No, it's not the Yankees and it's not the others, because recently they're not doing so well. My first intuitive answer to him was, I promise you before the Messiah, they're going to win big time. But the story behind that is the whole Mashiach, Messianic belief, that not only the Jews, but other faith groups believe very strongly, is the core of our hope. Meaning, people live in the quandary, people have constant question, why things happen. Rabbi Kushner is a good example. I assume everyone knows the writing of why bad people have a great life and good people have, I put it on purpose the other way around. And why good people have a terrible life, bad life. It's not Rabbi Harold Kushner alone. This is go back to the book of Iyov, the book of Job, which hopefully we're going to have sessions to understand those life questions. The truth is, I'm type of person that can live along my entire life with question mark. It's fine to live with question. One of my teachers was a well-known Harvard professor. He used to say, the beauty of life in duality, life in a question mark. It's not only healthy, but it's kind of bring you to a different dimension, versus if you're expecting immediate and right now at this very second answer to all the questions. The famous question is the Jewish suffering, the persecution of the Jews, and that's important part of our talk today. I heard once a story about an elderly person that celebrated his 100th birthday. And one of the attendees asked that fellow a question: what is the secret of your long life? And he looked and he said, look, when I was a young man, I have a lot of questions. So one day I was so disturbed, I said, oh, Creator Almighty, you got to give me an answer, and right now. And sure enough, that night I have a dream. And I saw an angel of death came to me and says, look, I can give you all the answer you want. You just need to come along with me, and I promise you have all the answers. And since that, I do not have any question anymore. So, with that mindset, you may ask another question: how come, if you read the history of our people, even a great man like the great Maimonides gave a date? Or if some people interpreted, like many, not only Jewish scholars, but Christian scholars as well, interpreted this mind-boggling sentence from the book of Daniel, which tried to spell out the date that the Messiah is going to come and redeem everyone. And some rabbis even gave about the date, how that can be, because we passed those days, and as far as I know, the Messiah is not here yet. And again, the answer for that, I think, is a beautiful answer I heard once from Rabbi Beryl Wein, God bless his heart, and I love that answer. He relates a story which I have also experienced with my kids. When I serve a community in Maryland, once I went to Boston to visit a friend, and as you know, Maryland to Boston take several hours of drive. The kids were very little. So my little son and little daughter at that time were like nudging me all the way. Dad, you promise we get to Boston, and where is Boston? It's our drive, 2-hour drive, and there's nothing there. So what do? You stop and you show them a sign. You see it's written here, Boston? It's very soon. It's going to happen. Don't you see this sign? I think that's the tendency of many rabbis, not only Maimonides, but Malbim and many others, try to give a date. So in a way, they give people, they assuage the emotional pain, this excruciating pain that people carry over the unknown, especially the Jews that live in those years in the heavy Christian Europe with all the persecution. They yearn to get a clear answer for the final idea of what's going to happen to Jewish people. So there are several books I highly recommend for you to read. I just give you the idea. It's one book written by the Hebrew University professor, the late Gershon Scholem. Gershon Scholem was not only a German Jew that have his tremendous erudition, but in 1973 he wrote a book, more than 1,000 pages, The Life of Shabtai Tzvi, the false Messiah. It's a fascinating biography, relatively easy to read, and we try to do today is like abbreviation of Gershon Scholem's writing. Is another book by a prolific author, Anne Applebaum. Anne Applebaum wrote a book called The Gulag, G-U-L-A-G. And that's, again, depending on how you pronounce. But the idea is that it's an expression of understanding what brought the Jewish world to that huge crisis that affects us to this very day, the story of Shabtai Tzvi. The last book, for those who really avid reader, is a book called The True Believer by Eric Hoffer. Again, you know that book? That's an excellent book. Again, try to give us an overview to the story of our people. So before we go to the story of Shabtai Tzvi and its debacle, we need to set up our mindset to those years. I'm in a way back in our history, 1648 to 1649. It's called in Ivrit Gezerot, Tach and Tat. This was one of the most horrible 2 years in Jewish history that basically almost expunge the Ukrainian Polish Jewry. Yes, we suffer the Holocaust with the 6 million of our people, and we are small group of people, let's exaggerate and said 18 to 20 million Jews. But at that time, soon we're going to hear clearly, it was more than 250,000 Jews that get killed. So obviously, in comparison to the world crisis, it doesn't sound too many, but for us, which we value so deeply life, and especially at that time, it's huge. The whole idea of killing Jews is a subject, it's unsolved question, it's unsolved subject of anti-Semitism or anti-Jewish sentiments that many scholars say that it's not a clear or rational reason. It's just the way some people born and raised and enculturated. So in 1649, it was a fellow in Ukraine, one of the most evil men that ever born, whose name is Bogdan Khmelnytsky. And Bogdan Khmelnytsky was a Ukrainian leader that fought against the Polish. The story a little bit, really in very short, what happened at that time. The Tsar in Russia controlled the huge Mother Russia. And one of those was obviously Ukraine. And Ukrainians in those years have no rights, meaning people have no education, they didn't know how to write, how to read, very basic things they did not have. Most of them just walk in the field, walk in the farm or walk in the field, and unfortunately spend whatever they have over alcohol, beverages and things like that. And Khmelnytsky was not only a very strong nationalist, but he basically declared, which happened a lot, a great idea from the entire world history that happened again and again, and reoccurrence is just amazing. He just wanted to release the fellow Ukrainian from the terrible Polish landlords and Poles controlling over their lives. That's in very short. But obviously, since the Jews always the victim, and Jews are basically the one to be blamed for the Jews were the first to be killed or to be persecuted. So again, we need to understand the mindset. The Polish government at that time allowed the Jews, unlike other countries, to have a certain job, a certain profession. But as we sing by the end of the Passover Haggadah, the Chad Gadya, and you read how basically the cat is watching over the little lamb, it's not, in a sense, the dog taking care of the lamb, not because he really cares for the lamb, but he hates the cat. So in that sense, the Polish gave the Jews rights, but it was for selfish reasons. Meaning, you have these extremely wealthy Polish landlords that they did not want to bother with collecting rents. So the Jews did not own those properties. The Jews were basically, which we call in the modern days, the management company. Meaning, the fellow Jews need to go and collect the rent for the Polish landlord, and they get their cut. Now, I don't know how many of you experience a real estate business. To this very day, you do not want to have the pleasure of collecting rent. I promise you, I experienced that 20 years ago. It's not a pleasure. Now, at that time, especially from those poor Ukrainians, it was a lot of animosity and instigations, obviously not so much against the Jews, it's against the landlord owners, but since the Jews are the one who is the agent who come and collecting the rents, they are to be blamed, or they are to go after and do something. So that's one entity. The second entity is that Jews allow at that time. If I give you a name, I assume you get the connotation, especially we have many here who speaks Yiddish. There is a well-known family by the name of Bronfman. And in Yiddish, Bronfen obviously is what? Thank you, friend. You're right, whiskey. So the idea is, it was several Jews in both Ukraine and Poland that they manufacture the liquor, because that was the government allowed them, and they sold it to whom? To those poor, Ukrainian farmers. So therefore, in one hand, the farmers not praise and admit and love them for that, obviously, but also they encourage increase of need for alcohol and collection for fund from the indigent. So that's the second profession. The third one, which is the worst, in the modern days we call a banker. In those days it was a hard money lender, which again is unpleasant profession that allowed the Jews to go ahead and lend money. The problem is, all of those professions they allow because they knew that it's not good for them. It's just good for the country or good for the taxes, but not good for those who want to implement it. And the Jews have no choice, because if you read history, one of the fascinating things is that up to 1860, for the entire Poland, the entire country, it's recorded only one pharmacy owned by a Jew. Meaning, the whole idea of the Jewish presence in any other profession in Poland was totally forbidden. So, as a result of that, obviously, they became the money lender. Now think modern day. You think that the guy is crazy if he charge 14 to 18% for cash in 24 hours, right? In those days, it recorded that they charge 30 to 40% interest. Now think about it. Those poor people that got those loans obviously will never be able to get out of debt. So they are slaves in a way for this relatively few, but Gevirim, Jewish hard money lender. So it's almost like, remind me the story of the old mafia, that they hold you by your throat and you never get out. So those loans create, again, sense of animosity against those Jews. For all these three different professions the Jew allowed, it gives the Polish government a feeling or promulgation as we are for the Jews, we are for equal rights, we want to give them everything. But the reality is, it was very limited. Jews not allowed to study at universities. Jews are not allowed to have their own businesses. The independent entity of Jews was impossible. It always partnership with other Polish people. So eventually it was a combination of the Cossacks and the farmers, led by this evil man named Khmelnytsky, to go and get rid of those horrible people, the Jews. Now the problem with the Cossacks in particular at that time, it was a tribunal, cruel mercenaries, meaning people who just want to go out and have fun of killing. Now try to measure that in the language of today. If we talk Holocaust, which again no one can explain in full and understand, but gas chamber, for example, produces a unending situation. A few people push some buttons and you have a mass murder of mass of people. At that time, they need to use a spear or swords to kill people. So if you talk this amount of people that get killed and the amount of the blood and the animosity involved with that, it's not only a deep scar in our history, but total understanding how the Jewish world traumatized over that. If you go to Kiev, to this very day, it's the capital of Ukraine, you see there is a place. I was invited as a cantor by the chief rabbi, Rabbi Yankel Blech, at the early 90s to be the cantor for the high holidays. So there is a place called Krishiatik. It's the sports hotel and there's the center there. And they see a big monument of Khmelnytsky, because for them, for the Ukrainians, some of them to this very day is a national hero. Versus for us, we see him in a sense the same as Hitler and Stalin. Is no different in a sense between Khmelnytsky and them. So again, it's estimated about 250, 260,000 Jews get killed. The rest fled, ran away. And the Jewish community, the Jewish structure of any Jewish life totally eradicates. So there are several books that try to give us the feeling. There is a Hebrew excellent book, in my best knowledge, not, maybe I'm wrong, maybe it's already translated, but I have the privilege to know that, read that book in Hebrew. It's called Yaven HaMetzula. It's written by a fellow named Natan Hanover. And he tried to explain what exactly happened at that time between those years, and how from 1648 to 1942, how things shifted, and in a way is almost the study of juxtaposition of history. So as we said, at the 1648, they need to kill each other with sword, with hands. So if you think about 250,000 people, it's kind of amazing. Versus today with the machine guns and the gas chamber, it's a much efficient, and they produce much more. So in short, after all those tremendous sadness and depression and crisis, it was very befitting for Jewish world to look for someone who gives a instant resolution for all the Jewish problem. So 1648, 1649, the Jewish world was ready and willing to see the Messiah, to see the quick solution for all the Jewish understanding. We said earlier, if you are among the few that can live with the question all your life, you have a happy life. The moment you ask those questions, we are not always capable, I'm talking about honest rabbis, to give a clear, true answer to those questions. And the Maimonides said, Ki lo yir'ani ha'adam v'chai, that the Almighty said to Moses, when Moses asked him, I want to see your divine providence. And God said to Moses, is no such a thing that as a human, I create you as a limited entity, because I'm the only one who's unlimited. So you'll never be able to understand the Creator in full. So therefore, we try to understand why, after all this Jewish suffering, we need to face this worst ever, the story of Shabtai Tzvi. So what happened? In our days, you may call it a really diagnosis of symptom of manic depression or some high level of depression, which you treated with proper psychiatric medications and things like that. Those days, obviously, it wasn't any form of medication. And therefore, a guy like him was in a very early age. He came from a Jewish Turkish descendants, and to see him, on one hand, have a memory beyond words, like not only a photographic memory, but he was able to stand for endless hours and quoted from the Talmud to the Kabbalah and many more. Like a very young man, he gets ordination, which was unprecedented, almost 18 years of age, ordination as a rabbi. He was able to be a prolific author with no preparations. Yet, he was for a long time in a state of seclusion. He went days and days and nights without food. He closed himself up in his chamber and not talking to people. So obviously, in those days, the way that people see it, it's they think that he is ingenious. They never think that he is psychotic or he is a manic depressing candidate, and therefore they thought that he is basically talking to the Creator. And he is able, when he's not in public, to meditate and see God and be able to communicate over things that we don't know and don't understand. Now, one of the things that happened to Jesus, as I assume everyone knows, he gets hold with Paul. And the moment he gets hold with Paul, and he have the right PR agent that promulgate the new religion, that's basically create all this new religion to the world. Muhammad have the same thing. There are people who place their belief to the public. He, in a sense, wasn't a public person, but he get in touch with a fellow by the name of Nathan. It's called Nathan Ha'azati from the ancient Gaza. And he, in those days, was popular to write letters. And he wrote letters to the whole Jewish world, particularly the big names, the big rabbis, mainly in Poland, but also in the entire Europe, and get their consent that this is the solution after Khmelnytsky and after all the crisis of losing 250,000 Jews. Here we have the Messiah. He is going to lead us to build the Holy Temple in Jerusalem and have the happy ever ending of Jewish destiny. Now, if you read Gershon Scholem or others' books, you'll be shocked and amazed the amount of money and donation and support from not just the lay people or business people, but by the rabbis that was gullible enough, naive in a sense, that they gave the total support to that notion, that idea that here is the man that's going to redeem us, they're going to be the Messiah and help the Jews to reinstitute the temple. It's recorded that the Jews in Amsterdam is a good example. They sold the businesses, they sold their homes, and it's recorded that they, at that time it wasn't any ship available because they are all leased by the Jews in order to move to Palestine, to Israel, and greet the Messiah and be part of the new era, new world of happiness and redemption of the Jewish people. The problem with those charlatans, the problem with this type of fake person, from the historical perspective, he needs to deliver. Meaning, it's not just talk like politicians, they talk, but then when you reach the office, you need to follow up and show that what you promised, at least in part, you're going to do it and you're going to deliver that. And that was a problem. Why was a problem? Because at that time, the Palestine controlled by the Sultan, by the Turkish Ottomanian government. And the Sultan, not only as a Muslims, but also as a rules, at the beginning he loved Shabtai Tzvi. Why he loved him? Because he brought a lot of taxes, a lot of money. People came with all this wealth and they have a big tax cut, so they like the idea and let him go and prosper and be successful. Then things change. He starts speaking about reality show, meaning he was saying that, okay, very soon I'm going to be the one who built the temple. Well, you have to speak in a sense, people asking, intelligent people asking questions like, how really you're going to do it? So one of the things he did, he started going over the Jewish calendar and abrogated all kind of important dates. We are very close to Tisha B'Av, the time that we are sitting on the floor and crying and weeping over the destruction of both temples. He said, I'm going to build a temple, there's no need to fast on Tisha B'Av. Another thing that he did, just give you vignettes, some ideas. He said, look at the Fast of Esther. Fast of Esther, if you read in the Megillah, it was 3 days. So guess what? Purim should not be a day of celebration. We should fast for 3 days because we're going to build a temple and we're going to remember the story of Esther. Meaning, really, I don't want to use the words, but you understand what I'm saying, really ruining in big time the whole structure of Jewish oral teaching, rabbinic teaching, and more. Now, the story in short, and soon you're going to see more in details, the Sultan didn't like it. Didn't like the idea that he's talking about Jewish sovereignty and Jewish control and Jewish rebuilding the temple and things like that. So he put him under house arrest, and he said, you have to be restricted what you're saying and how you're saying, which I believe some people wish to happen to many politicians. But it's estimated, again, about 30% of the rabbis supported him. And obviously Nathan, who's his PR person, went around and said, it's all part of Chevlei Mashiach, it's all part of the upcoming Messiah. All this suffering and all this question, all this problem we have with the Sultan, it's because we need to be ready for the Messiah. And that's part of the Jewish suffering. That's the very, very last moment. The end of the story is very sad, and soon we'll go to details, but basically for those who can't wait to hear the end, so the Sultan basically forced him to come to Turkey, and he gave him 24 hours to pick and choose, either beheaded or convert to Islam. And Shabtai Tzvi converted to Islam, and about 6,000 Jews follow him. He was buried as a Muslim, but the result of that, it was a huge tragedy, a huge trauma to the entire Jewish world, that many, many scholars believe to this very day, the reason that some rabbis have a very strong notion against, for example, study of Kabbalah, against certain things in the Jewish mysticism and more, it's because the post-syndrome of Shabtai Tzvi and its debacle to this very day. Again, Nathan claimed that all of that is part of the suffering of the Messiah. And like the Torah story of a golden calf, that even Moses showed up and everything was nice, still 3,000 people believe that the way it used to. So still people believe that he's going to come out of his grave and redeem everyone. And that went on and on for more than 100 years later. And Nathan said that only the true believer will merit to be redeemed by Shabtai Tzvi. And because that's the notion that went on, eventually most of the Jews disown the idea, not only Shabtai Tzvi, but also the whole Messianic idea. Many, many Jews just stay away from that because of this huge trauma. In a way, the Tanakh, the Hebrew canon, the Hebrew Bible, they speaks about just as a metaphor, like women in the very advanced stage of pregnancy, and it's a stage of great suffering and great agony sometimes, and then you have the baby, which is a great joy. So that's the way Nathan and others try to describe the Chevlei Mashiach, the suffering time before seeing the Messiah, is only to prepare to that great day, the great moment that everything going to be rosy. And because of all this tremendous trauma, those rabbis that supported him lost their jobs. So you talk about hundreds of rabbis that just overnight lost the job, because all those communities that sold the businesses, sold the home, or immigrated to Israel, realized that the guy was charlatans. They didn't judge the rabbis favorably, and obviously the very few that opposed him survived. It was, in a way, relatively short time after the expulsion of the Jews from Spain. It's about 150 years after that, and some scholars hold that that's the fulfillment of the series of curses which we read by the end of book of Leviticus and the book of Deuteronomy. Is like the time that Jewish people going through a lot of suffering as a process of cleansing before the end of the days. So just to express those emotions, there is a famous saying, it's better to be alone rather to be with spouse that you really suffer with. So in that sense, the Jewish people in the retrospect, it's better not to have Messiah than to have a false Messiah. Because you have all these young Jewish gangsters at that time that was recorded. They went to the non-Jewish world in Poland and start creating a series of revenge against the Polish people, because they felt that since we're about to be redeemed and have the control over the world, that the Messiah is redeeming us, so we can get even against our enemies. It was only recorded mainly only one big rabbi, big name in Amsterdam, that opposed Shabtai Tzvi. The rabbi's name is Yaakov Sasportas. Rabbi Sasportas was from Portugal. He was one of the head rabbis in Amsterdam, and he wrote extensively very brave letters saying that Shabtai Tzvi is a liar, is a thief, is a crook, etc., etc. And he warned people from him. Obviously, no one liked him. No one likes the idea that he opposing the Messiah, and especially the strong language. And he suffered for that. They fired him from his job at that time. When Shabtai Tzvi was, when his highest moment, Rabbi Sasportas lost his job, and he was forced out not only from his job, but also from his community and his city. He was forced out. Just a little feeling or understanding how the emotion was so strong in support of Sabtai Tzvi. So he wrote one of his beautiful book. It's a Hebrew book called Tzitzit Novel Tzvi, which is indirectly paraphrasing the statement from the book of Job, and he used the term Novel Tzvi, is like the word Naval, is like the word someone who's a total crook, in illustration of what the damage is coming from Shabtai Tzvi. Again, according to Sholem and others, about 1/3 of the Jewish world believe in Shabtai Tzvi, believe in his idea of the Messiah and the way he was. Shabtai Tzvi, basically Nathan brought him a dress like a king, he dressed like a Caesar, like a king, and that's again another reason why the Sultan didn't like it, because he didn't like the Jews to feel such an autonomy that they can take over Palestine from the Turkish control. The idea of food again is another horrible thing that he created. He mocked the biblical concept of kosher foods, and he said, since I am the Messiah and I'm going to redeem the people and build a temple, therefore the whole concept of kosher needs to be changed. So he said you can eat a kosher pork or all kind of crazy thing. If you read the extensive of his nonsense in writing, it's frightening. He, for example, there is in the morning blessing, bless are you God, Master of the universe, Matir Asurim, the one who released the prisoners. So he changed it to Matir Isurim, that I am now the Messiah, so I am allowed to take things that prohibited and make it allow. He married a girl at the age, she was about to reach the age of 12, and he then have all kind of things that in the modern days you call it scandal, but I think Eric Hoffer in his book, The True Believer, tried to illustrate the study of fanaticism and how basically the world reacts to the extremers. It's frightening to think how during Shabtai Tzvi lifetime, when he was in a home arrest, so when he was, the Sultan gave him several chances before he did it, how the crazy belief of people, especially people who look for the instant answer for the whole problem, how he brought people the hope, he brought people the fantasy of a great world, and how Nathan really in a horrible way took advantage of people and kept saying all the time, whatever you see, it's only part of the final suffering before you're about to see the baby coming out of the womb. It's recorded, as we said, to the almost end of the 18th century, so many years afterward, that still you have Sabbateans, people who still believe that he soon will come out of his grave and help us. Unfortunately, the majority of the Jewish world was total depressed, total broke, total huge struggling, very much those who read literature of Holocaust and try to understand how the Orthodox rabbi tried to handle the Shoah, which is one of those subjects that I humbly said I don't know, I really don't know, because some of you may know, but my grandfather lost 72 members of his family, so I have no clue in a sense of understanding, true understanding, but because it was such a huge investment, because it was such a huge hope and belief and everything turned to be a lie, that basically create a tremendous need for an answer. And many scholars, including myself, humbly speaking, hold that that's the secret of the Hasidut. As you know, Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov came out with the idea of the Hasidim, which is serving God with the act of happiness, etc. Or many scholars said that the Enlightenment movement, later on the Reform Judaism, as well as the other movements, the Humanists and the Lithuanians and the Musar movement and many more, it's part of that. But again, you ask a question, so how come today in 2017 so many rabbis strongly oppose a study of Kabbalah? Many hold that it's again is part of the still syndrome, the trauma of Shabtai Tzvi and its debacle. The fear that people misconstrue, especially people who don't have the background, and can go to the next level, which is try to practice things without foundations. One of the group that basically almost disassociate with Jewish faith were Jews that live in Germany, and they call themselves, we are German, but part of the Mosaic tradition. In a way, I'll be Jew at home and a German outside, and therefore I can not only be a melting pot of the German future and German society, but I can totally enculturated with others. There is a strong belief that the Zionist movement came out eventually out of that, and many more. Professor Scholem tried to use the kind of chronological order, tried to explain to us how things process and how things happen in a certain way. But in very short, in 1653, you use the term that later the great Arizal of the 16th century, the great Kabbalist, call it the broken vessel. The broken vessel is the theory that believes that the Almighty, in order for us to survive, contracted himself to a vessel, and in that sense, that vessel, when Adam and Eve committed the sin, it was a shadowing vessel, and we need to do tikkun or tikkun olam to repair the broken vessel. So the Jewish world collectively was worse than post-Chmelnitsky. As we said, it's better not to have Messiah than to have a false Messiah. And since that moment, there are some who still have that sense. I give you one example because there are many. In Poland, not long after Shabtai Tzvi, it was another horrible charlatan by the name of Yaakov Frank and the Frankists movement. You're welcome to click and read about them. It's frightening and fascinating story. Again, Yaakov Frank, or Jacob Frank in English, he basically tried to say that he is the successor or he is the new Messiah. The difference is, at that time in Poland, in a way to this very day, but that time was very strong, the Catholic Church was the one who controlled and in charge. And obviously, they never approve Christians to convert to Judaism, but vice versa. They love to see Jews convert to Catholicism. So he came to the head of the Catholic Church with a beautiful proposal that as a down payment, he can bring about 300 believers of him as the new Messiah, and he make them convert to Catholicism. And obviously, because it was post Sabtai Tzvi, the rabbis in the communities fought against Yaakov Franks, and it was to this very day, if you read the literature, is those the Frankists and the Sabbateans, which is basically somehow almost like a subsequent order, just a different country, the notion of someone who declares himself as a Messiah and the Redeemer, and all these crazy people that follow them, and you will be surprised the amount of people that follow them. Some rabbis that tried to respond to heal the world was Rabbi Tzvi Ashkenazi. It was a great rabbi in Amsterdam that wrote a responsa called Chacham Tzvi in 1712 in Amsterdam. And he, together with another great rabbi by the name of Moshe ben Israel. Moshe ben Israel is a rabbi that was a descendant of Moranos. And when he was born in Lisbon in Portugal, but by the age of 8 he moved from Portugal to Amsterdam, and he studied extensively and he became the head rabbi. So those two important names, the Tzvi Ashkenazi and Rabbi Moshe ben Israel, they basically try to heal the world, try to find some type of response or answer to somehow calm down the communities. One of them recorded that they went to London and they talked to Oliver Cromwell, and they tried to convince him for the great Jewish need in a sense of acceptance and more, and he allowed the Jews to come back to England. The beauty of that is it's not so much for love of the Jews, as we said, the Chadgadia. It was because he's believed that Jesus will come back if there is a remnant of Jews any place in the world. So therefore there is a need to have the Jews back in England in order to expedite the coming back of the Christian Messiah. If you go to England, you see the oldest shul, the oldest of the oldest synagogue in England is the Sephardic shul in the Van Max. It's a beautiful building, but they have there, old shuls, they have those diary books and a history. So it's recorded some remnant of the Shabtai Tzvi and its tobacco, the story of the Frankists and their result. Just fascinating to see the stories and the emotion and the involvement of that era. Now, if we try to wrap up before I see that some of you have a urgent question, so before we go to there, we try to wrap up our talk so far to understand the background and the mindset. To answer the question of why the Jewish people suffering, I don't think that any Torah scholar or giant professor or a human can give a clear answer to that question, and only the Creator can give an answer to why 1.5 million children die in the Holocaust, or why all these Harold Kushner questions and more. Yet we learn lessons, and one of the lessons we learn is that we went through so much physically and emotionally, but in the retrospect, nothing compared to Shabtai Tzvi. That was kind of the worst that ever happened. And because of his erudition, because of his convincing notion, because of Nathan and his promulgation, because of the huge movement from the rabbis that supported him, to this very day, as much as we went through World War I and World War II and the good news of the new state of Israel and much more, I may say that the majority of the rabbis are still frightened over the post-Shabtai Tzvi syndromes. So anytime you hear or read about the rabbis, a very strong voice against seeing lay people study Kabbalah, etc., Zohar, it's not because the rabbis have any feeling of the sanctity of the Zohar or the Kabbalah. Quite the contrary. The rabbi think that that's one of the most holy books, and the Kabbalah literature from the 2nd century to 11th century to 13th century in Girona and Provence to 16th century, the Arizal of Sefat, it's all very holy and sacred books and sacred study, mainly written in Aramaic. Yet the access of a lay people to access to the masses create its own set of problems, and today we touch one example of huge problem that can have daring consequences that affected many of our people's lives. At this point, I ask the first person to ask the question. Yes, everyone knows your name?